Welcome to the Second Line Show. I'm Nola Nash. Let's let the good times roll. Hi, welcome once again. I am Nash. Welcome to the Second Line Show. So glad you could join us tonight for our War Stories show. We've got some great guests lined up for you. And as always, we welcome your comments and your questions. So wherever you are watching us live tonight, go ahead and drop those questions into the comments section, or just comment as we go along and as we're talking, to those questions as we can. So we may not get to everybody. Don't worry. We go back and check those comments as we go, and we will see that you have left a comment. We'll answer them. If you're watching us on a replay, please leave those comments too, because we check them later on. So we're glad that you're here. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to get to introductions first with all of our guests here. And so here are the lovely people who are joining me. Now, we go Brady Bunch style when we are doing our introductions here on the Second Line Show. And so, Janet Oakley, that means it's you, my dear. Will you introduce yourself to the folks? Let us know who you are, what you write, anything interesting you want to tell us about, and of course, what you're drinking.
Oh, absolutely. I never get my camera right, so I'm hoping I look like intelligent.
You look fantastic.
Oh, thank you. One of the things I'm wearing is a Sylvie. This is something Norwegian women wear on their costumes. It's almost 80 years old, I believe. Mm-hmm. But anyway, my write is J.L. Oakley, and I write historical fiction. I say it spans the time from the 1860s to the World War II. And talking about war, I especially have been focusing on Norway during World War II. And there's not too much known about it. Now, all of a sudden, with the Atlantic crossing on PBS, people are really inquiring what was it like. Some facts about Norway, I'll just say 400,000 German soldiers occupied the country for 5 years in a country of 3 million. And it was a lot worse than it was often posed. Some fun facts about me. Well, I've been an interpreter at English encampment over on San Juan Island here in the Pacific Northwest as a school marm. I am a certified teacher, so yay for third graders.
Teachers in the house.
Teachers in the house. It was probably one of the best gigs I ever had, was working with third graders out in the woods and for the local Bellingham School District. But being Miss Libby out in full corset and hoop skirts really helped me imagine one of my novels called Mischievous. So that's some fun facts about me. I can churn butter, really good butter from nothing.
Nice.
And, I like doing that.
So what are you drinking, Janet?
Well, I have to show. I probably should be drinking akavit because that's Norwegian. But my son's a winemaker in Eastern Washington. And he works for Mark Ryan, and this is called Little Sister. It's not cheap. It's $75, but it's a very good. What is it? I'm the worst mother. It's a Merlot.
Janet broke out the good stuff.
I brought out.
Well, cheers, Janet. Glad you are with us today. Excellent, excellent. And so, Owen, of course, you know, as we go around our little circle here playing Duck, Duck, Goose, tag, you are it.
Hi, my name's Owen Dempsey. That name actually is pronounced Owen. I do have that right, by the way. There's an E at the start, but that's silent, so you can forget about that. It's 4 letters. 3 of them are consonants. 3 of them are vowels, and there's 1 consonant. You got that wrong.
You're talking to an English teacher, Owen. Get it right.
I'm much better at writing than talking. I write World War II fiction a lot of the time, most of the time, not all the time, but my basic story is Nazis are chasing me through the woods, and what am I going to do? That's what most of my books are kind of based around. I'm originally from Ireland, as you can probably tell from my charming accent and my strangely spelled name. I've been living in the United States about 13 years now. I was dragged over kicking and screaming, but my lovely lady wife was from this area. And yeah, I'm here now. So at the moment, I am trying to get more books out to market. I'm sick of waiting so long in between books and between all my Nazis chasing people books. And I hope to have another one out in July or August this summer. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I thank you for having me on tonight.
So wait a minute. Waiting so long between books. Didn't you launch 2 back to back?
Yeah. I did. Yeah. 3 weeks.
So we're going to ignore that statement entirely.
Last few years, I've been waiting like a year and 2 years between books, and like, no, that's for the birds. I'm done with that. I'm getting
that's too long.
Getting them
back
out.
to back.
Yeah, I'm not interested in waiting around. I'm interested in getting books to market and getting my books to my readers. So
excellent.
That's what I intend to do from now on.
What are you drinking, Eoin?
I'm drinking a very fine German beer called Paulaner, which I think is very apt. I really enjoy German beer. One of my favorite things about being an historical fiction writer, I'm sure you guys would all agree, is the research that goes into it. And I go back to Ireland about twice a year. I haven't been for a while because of that silly COVID-19 thing that you might have heard of.
Yeah,
but I don't know, Soraya, have you actually heard of COVID-19? There's a thing going everywhere in the world except for you.
Not such a big thing
except for New Zealand.
Yeah, we'll talk to you about it later. We can fill you in. But,
New Zealanders are apparently immune.
Yeah. Kiwis, yeah, it must be the long beaks they have.
Kiwis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so one of my very favorite things about writing historical fiction is the research, and I love going to the places that I write about. So I've been to Germany a few times on research, and for my last book, The Longest Echo, which I released in February, I went to Italy and I walked the places where my characters went, where they were being chased by Nazis through the woods. And,
because that's what you do.
Because that's what I do. And I saw all the places where all these terrible historical events happened, because that's another thing that I do, write about horrible things and how hope can come from them, I hope. That's one of my favorite things. Go to Germany, Italy, all these magnificent places, which I can't go to now because of something called COVID-19.
I hope to go back. I hope to go back to Norway. It's the same thing. But when I was there 3 years ago, it was like I went on the worst tour possibly of Trondheim, where all the Gestapo hideouts were. And
the worst tour?
They had number 2 war criminal was from Trondheim. So I had a wonderful friend I've known for 20 years online. He took me everywhere. He said, yeah, this is where they used to hide up here. And this is a cloister, which is a horrible real place. And, so it's pretty funny because it's an absolutely gorgeous city, but it has the worst Gestapo history in the world.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's nuts. Cool. Yeah. All right. Sorry, Elaine, you are next in our Brady Bunch circle of fun.
So Owen is quite hard to follow. So yes, I'm also from another part of the world. I'm here in New Zealand. So yes, we've been very lucky during this entire COVID-19 pandemic. We've actually been able to have our life pretty much as normal, except for the fact we can't go anywhere. So we're trapped on our little island here in New Zealand. But no, it's a great place to be. So
I was about to say, Soraya, come on, you're not struggling there.
No, we're not struggling. No,
don't feel sorry for you at all.
Nope, no one feels sorry for you.
But so I write World War II historical fiction as well. In fact, my new book that's coming out is similar to Owen's in that there is, Nazis chasing my characters through the woods. I love World War II in particular. I wrote my first historical fiction book was set just at the end of World War II, and it was the most painful, long process of researching and writing that novel. And I thought I will never, ever write another World War II story again. And somehow here I am, just finished my 8th one. So I'm very much hooked on the genre now. And I've become very passionate about telling particularly the stories of women during World War II. My novel, The Secrets We Left Behind, my latest book, is coming out it's actually 3 weeks today. And that story is, I was watching the movie Dunkirk actually, and I loved it. Brilliant movie. But at the end of it, I thought, where were all the women? It was, it was pretty much an entire cast of men. And it really made me think, were there women left behind there? Where were they? They must have been somewhere. And that led me down a path of finding out about the nurses that were left behind there. Many of them were able to escape, but during the evacuation, but there were so many women involved in different ways during that part of the war and what they were going through. So I always tend to look at a moment in history and think, where were the women and what were their stories during that time? So, yeah.
Excellent. Now, Soraya, I know you are in the middle of some extensive edits.
Yes,
and so your drink of choice is far more adult, more responsible and less adult.
It is. Look, there will be wine tonight after a long day of working, but I'm actually drinking a some concoction. It's a blood orange fizzy drink, a very fancy drink. But no, non-alcoholic. So I'll be having wine tonight, but it's midday here in New Zealand. So I'm in the future. I'm a day ahead of you guys. So yeah.
So how's the day been so far? What's the energy on the day? What should we know?
Well, it's actually, the future looks bright. It's unfortunately COVID-19 is still around, but
there's that. Sorry, Eoin, you're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah.
Soraya still says it's still around. All right, so Nicki, we're tossing it over to you, my dear.
Okay. Well, being as how we're talking about COVID, I think the first case in the United States was somebody from very near me. I live in Edmonds, Washington.
Wow.
Went to Wuhan to find a wife, and
he came back with COVID.
COVID
That's a trade.
And no wife.
Oh God.
And no wife. Man, what a sucky trip.
Yeah, that didn't work out.
I also I wrote my first book about World War II, but not in Europe, the war in the Pacific, and actually in China. So my first book, Tiger Tail Soup, takes place in a small island off just east of Taiwan, and it wasn't occupied, but it had the Japanese all around it until the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and then that very day or hour, then it was then part of World War II.
Interesting.
And occupied. But anyway, the book which just went live yesterday.
There you go. Happy launch day, by the way. A little belated, but congratulations.
And I didn't call it a historical fiction, but
all right.
I read up on when does the past become history, and it seems that historians seem to think that happens after 30 years, and actually this book took place 30 years ago, which doesn't seem like history to me, but you could say it's a historical fiction.
There you go. Awesome. And we're going to talk about your connection to what you write here very shortly. So, Nicki, what are you drinking tonight?
Like Janet, I have something from Eastern Washington.
Oh, I know that one. I've been there.
But unlike Janet, it doesn't cost $70.
No. Oh, my son gifts it to me. That's the nice part. So
yeah.
Janet's rocking the free wine. She's winning so far.
Well, I had to mark it. I was so amazed. I went and checked on their website. One of the bottles was $95, so I held it for special writers get together to share it. But once I saw, I said, "Okay, I'll give this person this one because it's in this price range." And none of them was below 50. I mean, so
you're gonna need to start talking to your son about what you want for Christmas.
Well, I'm going there on Friday. I'm driving over. We're all vaccinated, so I get to see my grandkids. And
there you go. I'd like to place an order.
Yeah,
all right, Miss Alexa Kang, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Alexa and Nicki were going to be on our show last week that we canceled for various reasons, but we are back with both of them. We are thrilled to have you ladies here. So, Nicki, thank you for joining us. And Alexa, we are so glad that you could join us tonight. So tell the folks a little bit about yourself, please, ma'am.
Sure. Thanks for having me. And I also write World War II fiction, and I write usually from the American point of view because I'm American, and that's why I know I thought about writing from a European point of view, but there's so many ways I could get things wrong. I don't know how to speak British or English. I don't know some of the customs. So I learned about American military, and I also lately have been venturing into Asian focused stories. My first series was actually a chronicle of the Battle of Anzio, and one thing I really like writing is big epic fiction. I tend to prefer big stories where you have a hero who is doing something very important and passionate love stories that shakes the world. So those are the stories I like. So that's what I wrote. My debut series, I chronicled the Battle of Annecy from the beginning to the end, and actually started from the United States home front. And after that, my next series, I actually decided to go a little further, something that hadn't been written about a lot. And that's also something I really like to do, is to write something that is adds to the genre, but hadn't been written a lot about. And so I did a trilogy that chronicled China's entry into World War II and how the city of Shanghai descended into World War II. And that was a really overwhelming project, but I was really glad when I got it done. And like Soraya said, when I was done, I'm never doing World War II again. This is just too much work. I'm dying. And here I am. I'm on my third series. Interesting period in history. There's just so much material that you keep looking into, and there's so many inspirational stories, and also stories about human nature that you can explore, and you can never really finish, actually. And there's so much to learn from. And I was looking into trying to venture into another genre. Then I realized, well, not lots of people have written about the Japanese Americans. There are some books about Japanese Americans in internment camp, and that tends to be the go-to topic. But I was actually reading I came across some articles about Japanese who were in the U.S. military and people who actually fought for in the army. So I got interested in that, and now writing a new series that the collections of individual stories from characters who I imagine to be in certain situations during the war, but not in the internment camp, but somehow involved with the war effort, whether it be with resistance or with or in the armies themselves, with different units. So hopefully I'll bring something new to the genre that other people haven't touched on as much. And I think that I'm also in a unique position to be able to do that because I'm bilingual. I speak Chinese and English, and I read and write as well. I also know some Japanese. I'm a sort of first, second generation immigrant. My parents were immigrant, but I grew up in the United States. So I actually can understand the point of views of the second generation Japanese Americans who were growing up in the States, born in the States, and what they were going through at the time when the war broke out, and some of the situations that it came up on. I think I had it nearly as bad. I mean, I'm living in the modern times, but I think I can understand where they were coming from, and I'm able to probably adapt some of their situations and translate them to the readers in a way that is they might be able to understand what this generation of people had gone through. So that's what I'm working on.
I think Nicki and I Nicki and I are from Washington State, and we know that a large number of our citizens were sent away. And one person I got to know is Kari Kondo, who was sent to Heart Mountain. And many of the young men there did serve in the 44nd, I believe. But there's another unit, the 554, which was
Go for it, Owen.
Just carry on.
Owen's breaking out the big guns over here. I'm sorry, Jen. I'm listening to you, but I'm watching Owen.
It's much more interesting. So it's
no, keep talking, Janet. We're just gonna watch Owen pour his beer.
Oh, pressure's on.
You gotta get a good head on it, Owen. I think Alexa froze up on us. She's going to come back. That's the head on the beer we need. Nice pour.
Very impressive.
Thank you. I actually saw this on Shark Tank. It's the only thing I've ever seen on Shark Tank that I immediately bought.
Wow.
You got a deal too.
We have a lot of beer drinkers in New Zealand. I think there'd be a lot of men very impressed with that device.
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be a big seller. Yeah.
I mean, I was already impressed when you cracked the second beer open, but when you put it under there to pour it, I was like, yes, bringing out the pour.
I thought that would go down well with you ladies, you know.
He's got to show off just a little bit.
Of course.
I love it. Well, Alexa's struggling getting back on. I'm gonna keep an eye out for her so she can pop in here. We'll keep her coming on there as we can. So, as you guys know, I am Nola Nash. I do not write war stories, so totally a different thing here. My new book that's coming out, Traveler, does have interesting things in it and some battles and some things. It has more like the Spanish Inquisition and lots of murder, lots of death and terrible things. But what I
wasn't expecting the Spanish Inquisition.
Yes. The Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish. Oh, sorry, it's Monty Python.
No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. So now everyone expects the Spanish Inquisition. I am fascinated with the Spanish Inquisition, and it comes from being an 8th grade English teacher and being a huge fan of Edgar Allan Poe and the Pit and the Pendulum, which of course was the Spanish Inquisition. And so being a fan of Poe and understanding the Inquisition for the terror that it was, it's an interesting thing for me to pull from. And you won't expect what I do with the Spanish Inquisition in Traveler. So you got to get your hands on that one when it comes out in March. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But there is some history to be played with in Traveler, even though it is set in modern day. There's a lot of history in it. So any of you guys that want to blurb for me, hello, looking for some blurbers. You want to know what I do with the Spanish Inquisition? That's how you find out. But in the meantime, what I will tell you about is the drink that is in my hand. This, friends, is Alexa, we don't know what you're drinking. Before I explain my drink, what are you drinking, Alexa?
I'm very lame today. I'm actually having tea with agave nectar. But that's because I had a massage earlier today, and I just realized I can't have alcohol because it'll dehydrate me too much.
No, well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to ruin the massage. We don't want to ruin the massage. You and Soraya are in, responsible drink land. We keep losing Alexa. We'll keep watching for her. Okay, so the drink that's in my hand. The drink that is in my hand is a very Nola Nash drink. So much like Eoin, I get comments about my name. And yes, Nola is New Orleans, Louisiana. It's also a very old name. So Nola. But New Orleans, Louisiana is very important to me. And the drink that is in my hand is a Louisiana, New Orleans hurricane. And so the hurricane came about.
I was going to ask about that. I didn't think it was coincidence. I was going to ask about that. I didn't think it was going to be coincidence that you're drinking a hurricane. Your name's Nola.
That's right. So exactly. Not coincidence at all. I spent many, many, many weekends of my youth at Pat O'Brien's, the bar in the French Quarter known for its hurricanes and its dueling pianos, and also the Fuzzy Leprechaun that I was drinking on the pub show. If you guys saw our St. Patrick's Day special, that was a fun night. You were there for that. Yes.
I was in the same part of the screen.
You were, and so you know all about the Fuzzy Leprechaun and a couple of those in, and Nola's off to the races. But this is my second hurricane, so brace yourselves, folks. The hurricane is an interesting drink. So the hurricane is equal parts, in this particular modern version, equal parts dark rum and hurricane mix. And this is Franco's hurricane mix because I can't find Pat O'Brien's. I don't know what happened to it. Louisiana folks, if you're out there watching and you know where the Pat O'Brien's hurricane mix is that I used to get when I was a teenager, let me know. But the hurricane was created and named thusly because when it was created in the city of New Orleans, it actually used the dark rum, which was actually cheap rum that was a product of sugarcane manufacturing. And so a lot of sugarcane plantations also had a still on the property. And so they would make a cheap rum from the sugarcane, which was known as taffia. And taffia was mixed with various fruit juices because it would help the sailors, pirates, with scurvy. And so because it would knock them on their butts, they would named it the hurricane. And so that is the history of this New Orleans favorite, which is the second one in my glass, the hurricane. So this is a Franco's hurricane, not a Pat O'Brien's hurricane, but you can get them in the French Quarter in a variety of ways, whether they are frozen or over ice. My favorite hurricane I have ever had has been had and shared with a voodoo priestess in the courtyard of a French Quarter bar. And so me and hurricanes, that is my favorite drink. And so when she and I met, we talked for a while and she said, let me buy you a hurricane. I said, yes, ma'am. And so off we went and we sat in a New Orleans courtyard of a bar and had a hurricane together. It was great fun. So that's a night I'll never forget. And so the hurricanes, of course, are a drink of my youth and, of course, a more recent favorite because of that memory there. All right. So those are our drinks for the evening. We've got some folks to welcome. Rena is here. Hello, Rena. Rena is a very loyal watcher of the show, as is Deborah King. Hi, it's Deborah King. We love her. She's a fellow author and fan of the show. Thank you so much for joining us. And cheers to you, ladies. We're glad you could join us today. Yeah. All right. So we're talking war stories here. So the question begs, what is it that actually draws you to the particular wars or battles or time periods that you choose to write about? So many of you are connected to World War II. And of course, we know there's a huge fascination, whether it is a Hollywood fascination, a book fascination, there's so much interest in World War II. And yet you've all found specific angles, even within World War II or other wars that you've chosen to write about, that mean something to you. And so you have this huge canvas that you could choose your colors from, and yet you have chosen these specific things to write about. So what is it that drew you to the specific stories, okay, see the hurricane's kicking in. Oh, don't laugh at me. I see you. In the corners of your eyes, Grayson, stop it. I will get the words out. Shut up, Owen. Oh, God. All right. So the specific battles, the specific time periods, the specific aspects of the war. See, I said it 3 times and I got it right all 3 times, Owen, that you choose to write about. So, guys, it's a roundtable discussion. So jump right in. What is it that drew you to what you chose to write about?
It's the size of the stories for me. I'm sure you ladies would agree with me. Sorry, I jumped in there quickly.
Go for it.
I just think the scope of the stories that are there, it's just unlike anything that I've really read about. This again, you ladies also mentioned this in your introductions, and it's just the gamut of emotions there, the stories, the things that people went through, and like it's really put a lot of things into context for me during COVID-19. Soraya, there's a thing called COVID-19 in the rest of the world. Anyway, it's like we're thinking about how hard our lives are and how difficult things are because we couldn't leave the house or we had to wear a mask. And if you compare our lives to the stuff that these people went through, like our lives are so easy and so privileged, and that made me feel a bit better about things, actually.
Yeah,
I like it. And yes, Soraya, there is much to be felt in the rest of the world, but we're all jealous.
Right, sorry, just what you were saying earlier on. I don't mean to talk over everyone, but I just want to ask you a question. I watched Dunkirk about 3 weeks ago. I originally saw it in the movie theater with my wife when she was pregnant with my second son, and she said it was so loud. She thought she came out and she was almost crying. She said, the baby's gonna go deaf in my womb. He didn't. I just tell you, he's okay. He's fine.
That's good to know.
Well, I absolutely love the movie, as I'm sure you did. But I actually watched it a few weeks ago again for about the 4th time. And I did actually have the same thought that you had about there's literally not one female in the entire.
It's not. Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible because I watched it. I mean, I loved it. I mean, I love those sort of films, and I'm not criticizing it in any way because I think it showed a very specific part of that evacuation, and predominantly they were men waiting on the beach, but there were also a huge number of women who were stationed there in many different roles, and it was just as terrifying for them trying to get out of Dunkirk as well and be evacuated. So some of them were evacuated days earlier. They were sort of from slightly different areas, but it just really struck me that there were just no female characters at all and no women at all on the screen. Ukraine. So that was a real sort of, the minute we stopped watching it, I looked at my husband and said, where were the women? I've got to find out where the women were and what they were doing. So that was, straight away, it really just sparked that idea for me. And most of my stories do often begin like that. But Nola, just going back to your question of why World War II, I never started out thinking that I would just keep writing in one period of history. But every time I finish a novel, I found some incredible piece of research from the previous book I've been working on that suddenly sparks an idea for the next book. And it's incredible just how many new ideas and how many incredible things I come across specifically about women doing incredible things during World War II. So it's like you fall down the rabbit hole of World War II and you just can't get out, because there's so many amazing things there and so many new stories that we can come up with as writers. Yeah.
And I love that you've chosen the women. That's an interesting perspective too. And I think we've had a lot of movies in the past and a lot of stories that have focused solely on the men's role. Mm-hmm. And the women have sort of been the side characters. I mean, I grew up watching the classic movies, black and white movies, and the Andrews sisters were there doing their USO thing, and they were singing Boogie Woogie Boo Boy and all that stuff. And that's what they were there for. They were there to look good and to entertain the troops. And yet there was so much more that the women were doing.
Yeah,
and it's sort of been glossed over for a while. And so I love that you have really tapped into that as your particular niche that you have addressed, especially with The Last Correspondent, all of these things that you have done to really focus on women in World War II and the roles that they had that were important. I mean, they weren't just, pretty girls singing on stage for the USO. I mean, there was a whole lot more to it.
That's what I find incredible. At a time when women were supposed to be,
that's what I find incredible. At a time when women were supposed to be,
just being so very much on the home front. A lot of people had no idea that they were, fearing, fighter planes, and they were, working as journalists and war correspondents, right close to the action, and, and nursing and so many different things. So I think when my first novel came out, perhaps, and I think it was 2014, there wasn't much being written about women in World War II, whereas in the last few years it's exploded, and it's just so wonderful to see so many stories, exploring the war from that female perspective. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Now, Nicki, you have an interesting connection to what you're writing, and what you're writing has to do with your husband, correct?
Yeah, a lot. Two things that drew me to both my novels that I've written. One is a part of the history that is seldom told, and the other is personal experiences or experiences of my husband. So the first novel I wrote started with, it was inspired by the stories my late husband told about his childhood in China during the Japanese invasion. And of course, the war in the Pacific was actually what got the United States into the war, with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And yet people seem to be more interested in the war in Europe. Actually, my dad fought in the war in Europe, so I was too. But there's a lot of history, not only in the ships that are sinking other ships and so forth, but when the Japanese first invaded China in 1937 and moved on down the coast very quickly, taking all the cities along the coast. And the other thing I found as I was writing that story is it was about women that got left behind when their husbands went to war, but also it was about the fact that more people are killed in war by starvation and disease than are killed by gunshots. So the people that get left behind are really a big part of the story of any war. So that was interesting. But then my second novel takes place, the first part of it takes place in Manila. And I think a lot of people know about the people power revolution that took out Ferdinand Marcos, that was mainly responsible for getting rid of him. But that wasn't the end of the story. After that, the next president, Corazon Aquino, was, she had 10 coup attempts. during her presidency. So that's one part of that story of Win in Vanuatu is living through those coup attempts. Some of them big, some of them small.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very interesting part of history that not everybody is focused on. I mean, that is a snapshot of all of that maybe hasn't made the main stage. And so it's interesting that you've chosen that as your focus and having that connection to it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And of course, I lived in the Philippines. So my first novel took lots and lots of research because nobody writes very much about Shaman, the island I was writing about. Second one, I used my journals a lot. So,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So Janet, you focus on a totally different part of the world. You focus on Norway. And so why that particular area, the area and era for you?
Well, I think our genre here is Gestapo chasing us through the woods, but actually,
yes. Thanks for narrowing that down and just boiling it down.
That's why I live in this house, because of Nazis chasing me.
That's right. No, I came by a really weird way. I dreamed about a man in the snow surrounded by German soldiers. And I told a girlfriend about it. She said, you should write it down. So I wrote it down. That became prologue. And then she said, you should write a novel. I'd never written a novel in my life. But I'd have to say it was from my reading and personal interviews of Norwegian Americans in my community. We have so many in Washington State. Many came
That's
here.
interesting. Wait a minute. I didn't know that. Is that really a thing? Like, I mean, I hadn't really thought about Norwegians being in Washington State.
Well,
so, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but back that train up. I want to know more about this.
Well, that's a good question because I was so fascinated by the people I interviewed that they were living in parts of Norway that looked familiar to them in Washington State.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Ballard in Seattle already had an established Norwegian, fishing boat. They actually built the Alaska fishing program up in Alaska, because that was a territory after World War II. So I had access to people, and they're telling me these stories, and I'd already started writing the fictional part. And I almost stopped because I was hearing real dangerous stories that people were willing to share with me. But anyway, so my focus became, I found out through a book about Trondheim. And a lot of people write about Oslo. I don't speak any Norwegian, but I'm learning. And I can read it pretty good now after 25 years. Wow. But I think the main thing was that one of the things I discovered was the Shetland Bus, which was an organization by SOE Norway that went back and forth between the Shetlands, first by fishing boats, as early as the summer of 1940, and then eventually submarine chasers. And that was an amazing program. They went back and forth. Another piece that fell into place was Henry Oliver Rinnen and Trondheim. He was a Norwegian. He was barely 5 foot tall. And when I discovered him, I said, there is my Antag. But when you build a character, you try to learn as much about him at the time. There's more available now than there was that long time ago. So I built a secondary character so I could post where he was. But another one that really got me was Conrad Bonnie Svensson, who was the minister for the deaf in Norway. And he was very high up in resistance. And he is one of my heroes. So I developed a character as an agent who's pretending to be deaf. That led me into deaf culture in Norway and around the world. I got a substitute job because I'm reading endorsed many years ago with elementary kids, and they would sign their books to me as they read along in their books. And so I
love that.
I tell people I went in knowing no sign. I came out with 13 signs and a headache. But I get so that's in both the books, how the progression of deaf people, because in Germany, girls were sterilized. And there were great fears. So Conrad Bonnie Svensson's father started the Deaf Church program about 1890. So it builds a richness in the back. It also puts my character in danger. Will someone discover, blah, blah, blah. But I'm really happy about that particular aspect of the story. The other piece is actually, it's the 79th anniversary of Televogue. That's another piece. And see, all you probably have the same thing. Why are they writing about women, or why are they not writing about the South Pacific and China? And I thought that was so curious because I got my hands on Time magazines and Newsweek, And almost every book had something about Norway. And they're talking about this and that almost every week. But in 2000, no one was talking about them. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Now they're starting to look again, because it was occupied by 400,000 soldiers. Berlin was 3 million, and there are 3 million people in Norway. So it's what's really beautiful about it. And I think all you discover this, that you kind of become your own little expert. And I don't call myself an expert, but people are calling on me. And when you have someone who has experienced it personally, the most amazing thing, a reader reached out to me 4 weeks ago through my website, and he said he really liked Quisling. That's the latest one. But he said, in a couple exchanges, he said, my parents were deaf. They went to the deaf church in Oslo.
That's interesting.
So all of a sudden you have this personal connection. The funny part is that the resistance blew up the train station next to them. And when he met the person in the resistance, when he came to Salt Lake City, he said, I'm sorry I woke you up, because he was an infant. But, all of us experience this wherever little corner. They're now talking about women in Norway, because that's the same problem, too. The number of very brave women who risked everything in Norway, because terrible consequences happen.
I actually have research on my desk about women in Norway during World War II that I just came across a few weeks ago. So it's interesting to hear you talking about it. I came across an incredible story about women who were very, very good skiers, and they were able to ski. I don't have the exact details, but they were able to basically ski through an area where Nazis were, and they couldn't get to them because they were so slow walking through the snow in their boots, and these women just flew past them on their skis.
That's awesome.
It was incredible.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Yeah. Well, as somebody who has worked with deaf children before in the past, I am drawn to that aspect of what you write. And I mean, that is a fascinating thing for me, just knowing that is something that can feature so prominently in a book and be highlighted. I learned how to sign to work with a deaf student. My daughter is going into occupational therapy, and that's one of the things that she wants to learn how to do before she goes into private practice, is to learn how to sign, because so many children have that disability, or are signing because not necessarily that they're deaf, but because they don't have the ability to speak. And so that having that featured in a book, especially a war story, is fascinating to me, as somebody who's that's an area of the population that is very special to me. So I love that you featured that.
Well, my WP that I'm working on now is in Bergen 2 years early. I discovered one of the deaf teachers was killed by the Gestapo. So now I'm able to tell his story. And I'll make up a fake character, but I'll definitely work that into the story, because my character knows how to sign. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. So Alexa, I guess we're down to you, my love. So what is it about the particular aspect of war stories that drew you into what you write?
Well, I actually fell into World War II fiction writing by chance. I actually didn't know much about it before I started writing my first novel. I like a lot of people who write World War II stories or read World War II stories, they've had family members who had fought in the war or had gone through the war. I was writing fan fiction, fun stuff for just for fun, and I was writing fan fiction, and I had a small following of readers from a group of people who were following the same anime manga that I was writing about. But yeah, I know it's actually an older one. It's not anything new. It's not anything you know today. There was an anime called Candy Candy that came out of Japan from the 70s, and now there's a global following of women who had grown up with that. I mean, it's all over the world except in English-speaking countries, because English-speaking countries were the only countries where it didn't got broadcasted. And it was broadcasted in France, it was broadcasted in Italy, and South America is huge, and also Asian countries. So anyway, we found each other on the internet, and we weren't happy with the ending, so people were writing fan fiction, so fanfics, the love story that we weren't happy with. but I wrote some fan fictions that got fan translated, and it just got such a huge reception, and I kind of developed a following of readers. And then this original story took place in the 1910s and ended in the 1920s. And I got it into my head that I want to write about these kids from the main cast. And these weren't actually, the kids weren't actual characters in the old stories. They were characters in my imagination.
Right.
But if the kids grew up, they would land right in World War II. And I thought,
That's right.
write some fun love story. What is it? But the thing is, the people who follow this manga are not children anymore. They're grown up to be professional women. They've got all sorts of lives, and so I couldn't do anything just kind of half-assed. I was like, if I'm going to write a story, I'm going to go all in and figure out what the background is, make sure all the details are correct, and it started out as a hobby, but as I was researching, it was like we're discovering a new world for me. And now I grew up in the 70s. My grandmother, I still remember, she lived through World War II. She was a child. And although she didn't suffer much, she wasn't in a part of the country. She was from China, but the southern part of China. And she didn't really, to my understanding, it wasn't greatly affected or hurt, or her part of the world didn't get too affected. But, there were lots of things that she knew, the hunger, the poverty, the aftermath of the war, all that. At the time I was growing up, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. And all the technology, oh my God, so much technology came out of World War II. There were things that we take for granted, but I was researching, looking for details to put into my scenes in my story. So I was thinking, oh my God, the telephones, the cameras, and all these things were the canned food.
Yes.
I just knew how. I just never knew that this war has such a cultural influence on us, all the way up until the 1980s. Honestly, like everything kind of just stayed that way. TV dinner, for example, yes, there was a microwave, but really all this, if you look at the TV dinners, isn't it kind of
so many advances happened during the war, and I think that's one thing that people don't necessarily think about. Is it's not just weaponry that's advanced. It's everything that the soldiers need, everything that the people need. There's so much technology that's advanced.
It's like mass-produced production of all sorts of things, and it stayed that way until for the next 30 years. There weren't a whole lot of events that would change anything until really basically into the 80s, and then into the 90s when the tech revolution, the computer revolution kind of replaced that. So that to me is super fascinating, is that all these things in my life, I didn't realize it came out of World War II. And what's interesting also is we today tend to think that was such a long time ago. People we think people were primitive or something, but they were not. My editor, she's like walking things. She's questioning. How did they take pictures? Or did they? The soldiers had cameras with them. They were, they would go to places. She's like, they had that. But a lot of times my editors are picking things out, and they're like, were they able to do that back then? I said, yes, I researched it. Yes, they definitely were a lot more advanced than we think they are. So the lifestyle, the amazing cultural influence and the aftermath of it fascinates me a lot, actually. And writing historical fiction, I think all my fellow authors would realize, could sympathize with this. You're sitting here, like everything we had to research to death, or the readers get really upset. I was doing a scene, and I would have a character going in, go ringing a doorbell. Then I would stop myself and say, "Wait, did they have
a doorbell?"
So like, did they ringtones, or was it a jingle? And I would spend the next 20 minutes just making sure I'm not waiting for something that someone is going to be. They didn't have that, and I remember one time, and some of you guys may know a fellow author, JJ Toner, and he made a post in our Facebook group. He said someone wrote a bad review because I said the character pressed the elevator button, and they didn't have elevator buttons.
There's the person with a lever.
turning the elevator, and there weren't buttons until later. And I happened to be writing a scene where my characters were going into the elevator, and I was like, oh my God, they didn't have buttons. I better figure out how there's an elevator girl who would take everybody up or the guy. So, so I learned a lot about the ways of lives and of course I mentioned before the human stories and all the inspirations and like Eoin said, my gosh, what we have today, people talk about how bad things are today, but when you write World War II fictions, when I do research and I turn on the YouTube and I look at the video clips of bombs just dropping down on these soldiers or people, I'm just like, how? We don't have it nearly. We don't know what bad is. We don't know what bad is. I know that bombs is still being dropped in some parts of the world today, but this was a global scale. People just it was just towns were destroyed like everywhere. So one thing I want to mention, and this is interesting, relates to what Soraya said earlier, that when she watched Dunkirk, we didn't see any women, and I felt the same way. But I thought, oh, this is a story about soldiers and maybe the women just didn't fit in. But after my first series, I ventured into writing stories I focus on Asian characters. I don't plan to do that as the only thing I do. Just so happened that the last series, this series is what I wanted to write about. What I found though with historical fiction and including World War II fiction is that they tend to always have these Asian female characters. Like no one writes about the Asian men. And there's always these suffering, god awful Asian women who suffer so much. And yes, they did. But I just love writing Asian male characters because World War II was a huge event in Asia. And lots of men actually were, if you're going to write about the political history side of it, the leading war side of it, it was just a period of the time. Men were in control. Men were in action. Right. And if I want to write action, it's very hard to write a woman because they just weren't in the position to do a whole lot except behind the scenes, or they would subvert their roles and do something kind of not necessarily in the supportive role, but they couldn't be in the government meeting. They couldn't be in military meeting, or they weren't in the in official capacity that they could do anything. So I ended up writing Asian male characters, and it was so fun to do that. It was so fun to do that because I can cover the bigger picture, the political side of how the war happened, and I could put my characters in the middle of the action. So in some ways, I think it's true that in a lot of the war movies we see coming out of Hollywood, it tend to be more male focused when it comes to war. But I think for the Asian part, when we come to stories that deals with Asia, we tend to have they just deal with more women. I don't know if it's just easier for them to write about, or I don't know what it is. Why is it so undercovered when it comes to what the men that were in action in that part of the world? So hopefully I'll bring something more to that.
I love it. Everybody's got their own focus for what it is that they're working on. And I think that's one of the great things about war stories and about writing historical fiction is you find the thing that really fires you up. And that's the thing that you focus on. And I think it comes across in the writing for each and every one of you as well. And speaking of things that fire us up, I'm going to tell you a story of the War of 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans. And one of the things about New Orleans history, I find it very interesting, Louisiana history, because it often went horribly wrong. So here we go with the Battle of 1812. And I call this British Americans, French pirates, oh my. The Revolutionary War wasn't the last time Americans in England, in the English, crossed swords, so to speak. So the War of 1812 was between the Americans and the British, and it lasted until 1814. One of the most famous battles was the Battle of New Orleans, which didn't happen in any of those years. So England was at war with France. America traded with both. England and France didn't like it. But America had more beef with England than France because England was doing stupid things, like forcing American soldiers into the British Navy and inflicting harsh trade restrictions. Basically, they would search American ships when they pulled into port in England, and they would basically press gang these sailors into the British Navy. So the United States was like, no. And so President Madison, so while his weak ground forces and stronger naval forces, thank God for the U.S. Navy, were battling around the country and into Canada, Andrew Jackson was handling things in the more southern reaches. So here's Jackson over here, of course, became another American president later on, specifically Louisiana later in the game, or after the end of the game. Hang on, more on that coming. So England decided they needed help infiltrating the Louisiana coast to get to New Orleans. Typo there. No, I wasn't drinking a hurricane, just simply overlooked that letter T. Keeping with their sneaky ways, they decided to enlist the help of Jean Lafitte. Jean Lafitte was a notorious pirate and smuggler. They bribed him with $30,000, which was a lot of money at the time, to help them. They did miss an adjective, though, those English. Duplicitous was the adjective they missed about Jean Lafitte. Lafitte sent word to Governor William C.C. Claiborne that England wanted his help and offered instead to help the Americans if old Billy Claiborne would pardon him and his men for piracy. Claiborne, not known for making smart decisions when it came to pissing off prominent French locals, refused and instead sent the U.S. Army and Navy to wipe out Lafitte's camp in Barataria Swamp. So no, we don't want your help. And here are the military forces to go obliterate that little patch of land you call home. Lafitte was irritated, but not without recourse. He decided to go above Claiborne's head and offer his support, along with the ships and arsenal the U.S. Army and Navy missed, to General Andrew Jackson for the same price. Jackson, evidently smarter than Claiborne, agreed. So what comes of that? Jackson did much of his commanding from a tent as he was very ill with intestinal issues. So whether he had dysentery or something similar, Jackson was confined to a tent but continued to give orders during the Battle of New Orleans. This illness was likely caused by drinking foul water, which of course, as he was moving troops through, would have been something fairly common in those days. On the ramparts of the city, the three Lafitte brothers, which was Jean, Pierre, and Alexander, played a key part in the crushing defeat of the British and sent them back out to sea. And the spot in the Mississippi River where the British fleet turned around is still to this day called English Turn. So President Madison kept the word of his general and granted the Baratarian pirates a full pardon. Pierre and Alexander, who was known as Dominique You, Lafitte, were honored in a parade through New Orleans that celebrated their victory. Jean was very proud of his brothers and their honor in the parade. However, he had work, piracy, to do. So he very quickly went right back to plundering the Spanish Main. And then Pierre, having had his moment in the sun, followed soon after. Now, Pierre he died not long after that in Mexico. But Jean's fate was a bit more obscure. Alexander was the only one, Dominique You was the only one who retired after the Battle of New Orleans, which happened on January 8th, 1815. Hold on to that date, folks, because that was a full 2 weeks after the Treaty of Ghent was signed, ending the war, making the Battle of New Orleans a stunning but completely unnecessary victory for the Americans and the French pirates. So the Battle of New Orleans, one of the most famous of the War of 1812, was just simply not needed.
They had no internet.
Not in the war.
No internet.
So there you go. So it took a little while for the knowledge of the Treaty of Ghent to reach Andrew Jackson. And so instead, he has this crushing victory and completely unnecessary. All right, so folks, I told you a little bit about this before we went live today. So your lagniappe question. A lagniappe is a Louisiana word for a little something extra. It is the 13th donut in a baker's dozen. So if your books were a board game, what would it be and why? So having all of these countries here represented, we pretty much have the board game of Risk here. But is it Risk or is it something else that you think that your particular book would fall into as a board game?
I just actually found a new board game. I quickly had a look called Axis and Allies, which I think is
I used to play that with my brother when we were kids.
Did you?
Yeah, nice.
I'm going to say that one or the game Risk. So I think either of them would suit.
Excellent, excellent. You guys agree or what? You got a different one? Anybody?
Yeah,
I have a different one. When you asked that question, I was thinking the first thing that popped into my mind, honestly, was Jumanji.
Oh, that's good.
I just felt like when I have a mountain of research to sort through and I can't figure out, it's like a stampede of information. I'm like crushed and I'm trying to figure out my way out of it. And that was the first game I thought of.
I love that. I love it. What about the rest of you? You guys got a game or the Risk kind of covering everybody?
I don't know. I thought, go ahead, Nicki.
Well, I was going to say Chutes and Ladders. I'm not much of a game player. And if only my grandchildren and my oldest daughter were here, they're all big game players and I'm not at all. So I went back to a childhood game.
I like it. That's one of my favorites. I love Chutes and Ladders. Give me some Chutes and Ladders anytime.
If I remember right, you go up and you're doing well and then bad and
then you go down. That's right. That works for me. I like that.
So you guys call that Chutes and Ladders?
It's also
Snakes and Ladders, right?
And Ladders, yeah. Snakes and Ladders. Yeah, that's the other, the not American. Americans don't like snakes, so we get rid of them as often as possible.
Because I play that game a lot with my kids.
Snakes and Ladders. Chutes and Ladders, it looks more like a slide than snakes. I'm sure, something we're not fond of.
Well, actually, Snakes and was the old 19th century game. Americans did play that version.
Yeah,
I don't know. I came up with War of the Worlds. I don't think it was ever a board game, but there's so many things going on. And I have to say, my son taught me how to play it. I was visiting him in Hawaii, and he left me alone. And I think I got high blood pressure, but because I finally got eaten by a night saber. But I was a night elf for most of the evening. And I think I guess it's the discovery phase. Is it things pop up and you're suddenly in a different world and you have to learn the rules. You have to know the quest in order for it to happen. But I'll never play that game again. But it was really funny. My son-in-law, the winemaker, checked in with John Roth in Honolulu. He was going to school. And we did a joint quest together. And I have a screenshot. He's some mag. And I'm a night elf, and we're standing together as our family portrait.
That's so funny.
I was so traumatized for being always attacked by night sabers. Like, never.
I love it. I love it. Well, we've got some great board game ideas for you, as well as some great books.
Chutes and Ladders, Snakes and Ladders, actually, for almost summing up the life of a writer. Like, you roll the dice. You might go up, you might go down. You never know where you're going to go at any time, but it's fun. And it's interesting, and it keeps you engaged.
And you keep going till you get the top, or you slide all the way back down. There was that one space right before you got to the end of the game where the slide goes all the way down.
Yeah, you go back to like the fifth number or whatever. If you get to like 98, you go all the way down.
Yes, I always landed on that. Damn it. It was terrible.
Yeah, I haven't quite hit that one yet, but I'm trying to stay away from that one. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Well, guys, we're going to wrap up here a little bit. So here's another book that's coming out for you. Traveler is coming out. So the NOLA News section here is my signing with Black Rose Writing. And I'm very excited to announce that Traveler will be coming out March 10th of 2020. So be on the lookout for that if you like traveling the world. So we've had some world travel here tonight, and so some more locations for you, including Egypt, Jamaica, Rome, and Athens, along with, yes, I said it, the Spanish Inquisition. We do go to Spain. We go to Madrid and Toledo, Spain in Traveler. So lots of great destinations. I wasn't expecting
the Spanish Inquisition.
I know, right? I love the Spanish Inquisition.
No one expects the Spanish. I thought you might do it that time.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Which is why I use it, because I'm Nola Nash. That is my job, is to be unexpected.
I can't hear those two words together, the Spanish Inquisition, and not make that joke. It's just something I have in my heart that I have to do.
one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Exactly. Well, I mean, you got to do it, right, Owen? All right, so here are some of the covers of these fantastic books that you want to go out and get. And of course, here on the Second Line Show, our big thing is go read the synopsis on Amazon. Go take a look there. Leave your reviews there. But if you can, order that book from your local bookseller, bookshop, or any of the local booksellers. This is a great place, a great way to support those indie bookshops. It may take you another day or two to get it. It may not be as fast as Prime, but you know you're doing something good when you do it. And so one more book that you might want to check out is, of course, Crescent City Moon, Crescent City Center, my two books that are out right now. Traveler is coming. So we're going to real quickly watch the trailer for Crescent City Moon. And that is the trailer for the first book in the Crescent City series. Thank you. That is Crescent City Moon. It is.
That was fantastic. I can't wait to talk to you about it.
Absolutely. It is full of magic, murder, voodoo, and mystery. A touch of romance just to keep you on your toes.
Any hurricanes?
And, well, no hurricanes in that one, but feel free to pour yourself one before you open the first page. The words will start to blur by chapter 2, but feel free. All right. So if you've missed any past episodes of the Second Line Show, they do live over on Nolan Ash Entertainment, which is the YouTube channel designed specifically for housing these things, along with some other fun shows that we have done, including the Dating Game, which was a hoot and a half. If you haven't watched the Dating Game from February, you really need to go back and watch that. We had a great time, Janet, didn't we, on the Dating Game? That was so much fun. I enjoyed that immensely. And it is living over there on the Nolan Ash Entertainment channel. So lots of fun stuff there. We are currently on episode 29 of the Second Line Show. So episodes 1 through 29 live there, along with some of our special features. So feel free to check that out. Authors, thank you so much for sharing an hour of your evening with us. This was absolutely a blast. I adore talking to each and every one of you. This was fantastic. Several good friends here and some new friends as well. So it has been a joy, truly, to have you on sharing your stories as well as the war stories that you have highlighted in your books. So guys, go check out all of these books. Make sure that you are adding them to your TBR list, because you will not regret it. So thank you guys very much. Have a wonderful evening. It has truly been great to see all of you, and we will see you again soon.